Welcome to Charity Therapy, a podcast from Birkin Law about building better nonprofits. I'm your host, Jess Birkin. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Charity Therapy. Today, I've got a sort of unique guest on the pod, my BFF, Paul Birkin. Paul, thanks for being here.
Sure. Happy to be here. Excited to answer whatever questions I can concerning Bitcoin. It's an exciting topic.
Right on. As you might have guessed by the last name, Paul doesn't have a professional connection to the nonprofit sector other than me. So Paul is, can we call you a coder, IT wizard, SAP basis master, and a musician, great producer of techno records. You should check him out. And he's here today for this episode because Paul is my resident expert on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And he can explain it in a way that hopefully won't melt everyone's mind, which is pretty rare, to be honest. Now, Paul, I've gotten a few questions from clients about Bitcoin and nonprofits, and I knew you'd be the perfect person to help me tackle this. But first, I know Bitcoin is a confusing topic for lots of folks. So can you give us the sort of like elevator speech on what even is Bitcoin?
Okay, so let's take a stab at this. Bitcoin, I would say, it can be described as it's an engineered open source system. And it is a new technology that is aiming to solve a problem for everybody on the planet. How do you transfer and store value across space and time? And again, like all technologies that show up, it's kind of scary at first. And then over time, as more people use it and get access to it, it's not so scary.
Yeah, I like that. And I've seen a lot of the memes of sort of like the general public's reaction to electricity in your home or the radio.
Watch out.
Yeah. Or, you know, you can look up old clips of like people being like, the internet, what is that? You know?
Yeah. Or even email, first time people, why would I need electronic mail? Right.
Yeah.
Post office is just fine.
Yeah. So for those of you out there just being like, I don't care, what is this? Well, maybe just pay attention so that you actually might know a little bit something as we go forward. I've heard Bitcoin called digital gold. So it's kind of a way to store value. And that's going to play into some of our questions here. So are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's hear what these questions are. What do we got?
All right, let's do that. This roller coaster is off to a good start. One of my board members has invested in Bitcoin, and she's pushing us as an organization to put some of our cash reserves into Bitcoin too. We have a large cash reserve beyond a 3-month cushion for cash flow needs. Well, that's good. She says it's just sitting in our account and losing its value. I have to admit, she's right that our unrestricted cash reserves aren't yielding any return. After some research, we have decided to allocate a % of the reserves to Bitcoin, but I'm just not sure how we would get started. How do we go about doing this?
Okay, so this is actually an increasing problem pretty much for individuals, companies. Everybody is kind of facing this these days. Most people probably remember when your savings account used to give you 5%. And now the analogy a lot of people are using is this melting ice cube, right?
Yeah.
Anything I'm holding in cash is losing value. What can I do with it? And Bitcoin has kind of risen up as a solution to this for a lot of people and companies. So we're seeing public companies, treasury reserve assets being allocated. So this kind of falls into that. And there's a number of companies now that are available to kind of hold your hand if you are, business and you're like, how do I go about holding and storing this? Some of those, like River Financial is one. They deal with Bitcoin only. Unchained is another one that does collaborative custody, which is something that can be investigated. I think the place to start with this maybe is even on the website hope.com. One of the things people kind of see firsthand with Bitcoin is that it looks very volatile. And so this price action that people see day to day where it's zooming all over the place by thousands of dollars, that's kind of scary if you're trying to hold your savings in that and you're just not used to seeing things move like that. So having that understanding that there's a phrase, when in doubt, zoom out. So you want to kind of look at the long term, how has this asset kind of performed over time? And that 3-month cushion, is that what you said? That they have a reserve of a couple months?
I think their question says we have a large cash reserve beyond a 3-month cushion. So what that's telling me is that they're okay. Like a lot of nonprofits do not have sufficient cash reserves. And so they're like in a good cash position that if no donations come in for the next 3 months or their program revenue falls off a cliff or whatever, they're okay and they can make payroll. And so they just have extra liquidity. Now, one thing, I know I'm interrupting you here, Paul, but just
that's okay.
The thing that does make me nervous about this is like, I want to make sure that they know what their restricted funds are and that they're not considering grant funds that are in advance or restricted gifts or something like that as part of this cash, because nonprofits do have special accounting rules. And so this organization, they don't say this, but for anybody that's listening, like this has to be unrestricted money for the nonprofit that's not necessarily tied up with some other nonprofit accounting rule attached to it. So that being said, they've got lots of money available, apparently.
Okay. And the IRS does designate Bitcoin as property. So whatever the tax pieces are with that under current law. So when you're converting it back, right, back into cash if needed, and this is why, you don't want to have to convert it back because then you have all sorts of tax things that are brought up in the short term.
Yeah. And I think that's why they're saying, we have a bunch of money that they're not going to have to dip into, which that's good.
Right. And there is, though, there is a large banking field emerging that because Bitcoin's a pristine piece of collateral, right, there's no counterparty risk, which is unique with the asset, in that if you hold Bitcoin, there is no counterparty. And so there's a large lending market that is emerging, and this may be something in the future that nonprofits may want to explore, that they would be able to lend off their Bitcoin without having tax implications and things like that. So it's one of those on the horizon things that are coming, but it's exciting to see.
Yeah. A couple of things pop up for me on this is, first of all, just good for them, right? Like the fact that like your board has actually come around to this, like good for you. Because this seems it feels very risky to a lot of people. And the more you learn, the more you can understand that it's not as risky as you think. But a couple of things that I want to make sure that we say out loud. Well, the person saying, how do we go about doing this? And you've mentioned some institutional account places where they can go. And that is number one, is you cannot just have your executive director or a board member buy some Bitcoin for the organization. This has to be an organizational purchase with like segregation of duties, 2 signatures required. This can't just be like Jane, the board member, bought some Bitcoin and is the only person who can access it. Like that doesn't work. So you do need to go through an institutional account, and there are organizations that you mentioned that can help with that. And
they do have good concierge service in that they can discuss this. This is not a brand new. I mean, this has been going on for some time. So
yeah. So basically, I think what they would do is just reach out to a place like River and see what it takes to get started with an institutional holder account. And then the other thing, like what you were saying, is the second call, or maybe the first call, is going to be to your CPA, accounting partner, audit partner, whatever, because you need to get some advice on how are you going to put this on the books right now. It is property. It's going to have like a book value or whatever. And the accounting for this is something that needs to be dealt with, right? So
correct. And MicroStrategy, who is one of the big public companies who has basically a large treasury position now, they open sourced their entire Bitcoin for Corporations playbook. That's on that site on hope.com. They have that all available. So there is a whole accounting section in there that is available for people to look at.
Awesome. All right. Well, good. Let's, good for them. Let's move on. I got another question for you. I work at a nonprofit that helps refugees internationally, and we want to start giving direct payments to people as part of one of our programs. But wow, the fees to wire funds are so expensive. I've been hearing that Bitcoin is a good way to send money internationally. How could that work for us?
This is pretty exciting, actually. I just had a personal experience with this in the past year. And so this is important to kind of understand. Part of Bitcoin is there's two parts. You have the open source network that runs, and then you have the asset, the monetary piece, and they function together and separately. El Salvador, in this past year, has made Bitcoin legal tender. They have, I think, 70% of their population doesn't have banking access. Large amount of remittances that are coming in, going through Western Union, MoneyGram, things like that. And Strike is a company now in the U.S. that has basically set up a way to make direct payments to the population there using the open source Bitcoin network. So people are sending U.S. dollars through the network, and it arrives on the other side as dollars for pennies, basically. So it's really exciting to see stuff like that happening. I had a friend of mine, again, this past year, who lived in Santiago, Chile. He was mugged down there, lost his PayPal card, had no access to anything. On the weekend, was online asking any friends who could send something to Western Union. He would be able to go get it, later in the week when they opened. I had him install a Bitcoin wallet on his phone, sent him $100. He was able to go to an ATM and get money in the local currency immediately. So that was pretty powerful. That was his first experience using Bitcoin. And again, that's the kind of touch point where after that, you see the other services with their costs and just the time that's involved. And much like email versus the legacy mail system or, Netflix versus Blockbuster, things like that. I mean, once you use a system that makes everything immediate like that at such a low cost, it's really empowering to the individual.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that gets me super amped up about Bitcoin because, okay, your board's never going to put some cash reserves in Bitcoin because they're super conservative and can't wrap their minds around it. Fine. But the network piece is insane to me. Like working with international clients, and you've heard me gripe about this, like this is a problem for international nonprofits that, I've had a client working in Africa where they're trying to send money on the ground, like to get to deliver the mission, and people are going, it takes a day to get to the bank, and then you have to wait half a day at the bank for your turn to come. And then like nothing is going to go well when you're at the bank. And it's a nightmare. And like the whole international groups that are trying to do reimbursements for volunteers internationally. And there are countries that, like, I think in India, if you send money to one of your staff or volunteer straight to them, the government just takes tax out of it. And so then they're trying to account for like, well, we're trying to reimburse you a cost, but like the government takes tax out, and then wiring fees, just everything is crazy for my international people. And this to me is like the radicalization of everything in the philanthropic world with international stuff. So starting to look at, or even I have people who come in and want to start a nonprofit and they think because my merchant fees will be lower, and that's really the only reason that they think their socially conscious business should be a nonprofit, is so that they'll save money on transaction fees because they're going to do maybe like lots of really small transactions or something. And I'm like, stop trying to go down this road. Look at the Lightning Network. Like, can you actually use this low cost way to transfer value between two users instead? This is the thing that like I get all jazzed up, obviously.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's super exciting. For your listeners here, Bitcoin, they've probably heard, it's slow, it takes 10 minutes and whatnot. So, how are you having these instant payments and things? And you mentioned Lightning there, and that is a second layer that is built above it. And that, again, this is where all the innovation thing starts happening. You have that secure bottom layer, right? Every 10 minutes, this like granite.
Yeah,
and you can build
I
off
wouldn't
of
even
that.
get too technical because people are like, what?
Right.
But when you say a second layer, it's like we have the internet and then you have a search engine that is obviously that's a company, but like Google lays on top of the internet and helps you find information, right? The Lightning Network, I believe, is open source. Yes?
Yeah. People
So
can plug into it anywhere. Yep.
Yeah. So it's like this technology layer that allows you to use the Bitcoin network with instantaneous transactions. And we don't need to get into the blockchain and how all that works because this is a 20-minute episode. So
Yeah.
We'll have you back and we can talk about that.
But there'll be lots of breakthroughs coming through. So it's exciting.
Yes. There's just like a ton of cool technology that's going to facilitate the movement of payments between people all over the globe through this, which is going to radically change all sorts of stuff for the nonprofit sector in particular, I think.
Well, it's inclusive to all as an open source system. There's nobody standing in between that says you can't do that. So
right. Well, and like for people who are in countries where, we don't understand this in the United States and North America because we have banks everywhere. And we all like, what do you mean there's people that don't have bank accounts? Actually, I think people in the nonprofit sector understand this more because we are often working with people in poverty and in, experiencing homelessness and different situations where they don't have banks. So we actually may be more receptive to this concept that there are a lot of unbanked people, but globally there are so many unbanked people, and this is just going to open up huge possibilities for the nonprofit sector to like serve more people and facilitate things. And I personally think for more individual giving to occur because people actually have a way to give by just using their smartphone, or maybe you have more money in your pocket to send home to your church in El Salvador and not just to your family because now you don't have to pay all the Western Union fees, right? Like there's going to be all sorts of collateral consequences of this. Okay, we're dangerously close to like going off a cliff of just ranting about Bitcoin. So let's rein it in and go on to our next question.
All right.
One of our donors would like our nonprofit to be able to accept donations in Bitcoin. He's made a lot of money from Bitcoin he bought years ago and says there aren't that many charities accepting cryptocurrency donations. He seems to think we'd get a bunch of new high net worth donors if we start accepting it. Is this a good idea? It feels like it could be a lot of work for not a lot of payoff. Okay, Paul, I'm sure you have things to say about this, but first I need to rant here because one of our donors would like us to do something. Gag me with a spoon. Oh my God, you guys, seriously? Like we, as a sector, we have to stop being like one of our donors. But I digress. Maybe they're going to donate $1 million. But also don't think that just because one donor wants to do something means you should take a whole bunch of time and infrastructure costs to build something with the promise of maybe more major donors will just mysteriously pop out of the woodwork and believe in your mission if you just took Bitcoin. That's the only thing that happens with fundraising is you just need to make it easy for the millionaires to donate to you. No, that is not how it works. Okay, I'll stop. But let's just go with this, that nonprofit wants to accept Bitcoin donations. I don't know how to help them with that. What do you do?
Well, I think that there's a bunch of different options, obviously going from, easiest to hardest. So you have the different, there's some intermediary companies, right, who you can just have them receive the Bitcoin for you. They convert it into cash, right? And it goes into your account. They do all the paperwork, all that stuff. And there's some processors like Giving Block and I think InGiven. There's other ones, and they help nonprofits to take donations into their own Bitcoin wallet. So they could either hold on to the Bitcoin then, like as an investment, or I think they also charge a service fee then if they want to convert it, back into cash if they need that. And then whatever compliance, and IRS regulation stuff, accounting best practices, that would all be kind of handled. I'm sure there's a fee that they charge for that.
Well, yeah, just none of that's free. But I love that idea for the groups that are maybe you don't have a huge bucket of cash that you could invest, or B, your board is a little bit like, thinking about doing it. And this is a way in for you to say, well, look, if we get Bitcoin donated, let's hold on to it as a, way to build our reserves or whatever. I like that idea. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, and I was going to say there's other exchanges, I think, like BitPay and even Coinbase, where they basically give you like a checkout experience you can embed in your own web page.
Like getting the PayPal donate button, it's just some embed code, and you start an account and.
Right. So that would be the thing where I'm sure you could chat with them and figure out what is the process, what sort of tax receipts and how much donor info do they need to collect, and.
Those all seem very doable.
And then, of course, at the top of the stack, at the bottom of that rabbit hole is you run your own Bitcoin BTC Pay server, generating your own addresses. You are your own bank in cyberspace. And that
that sounds
that's down further.
You're going to have somebody at your organization who's super hip to all of this and willing to set it all up and teach everybody how to run it.
Well, right. But the beauty is there's a range of options. So it can start simple. And as you learn more, move through. And it's much like, you used to have we're in the yellow pages, find us here. And then somebody said, well, why would we want a web page? And eventually people are like, well, why wouldn't you have a web page? Everybody's on the web. And this will kind of follow the same thing. At some point, it'll just be, what do you mean you don't take Bitcoin?
Yeah, I do think that is coming. And I think it's really hard for people to sort of like filter out the wheat from the chaff on this, because there's so much garbagey, scammy sounding stuff that goes on. So just as kind of like a final thing, I just want to reiterate that we're talking about Bitcoin. We're not talking about personally, I don't recommend any other cryptocurrency. I don't think it's a good investment for nonprofits who need to be conservative with their funds. And I think there are a lot of scams out there that people need to be aware of. So while I am saying, yes, this is the future, I also think it's worth saying, if you're feeling like things seem scammy out there, you're not wrong.
And there's that saying too, Bitcoin has rules, not rulers, right? So it is governed by math and physics. And there's a set, 21 million Bitcoin. And if you hold a percentage of that, you cannot be debased, right? They're not going to make more. So it's simple from the standpoint of the rules that are there have been in place, for over a decade, running unchanged. And the network continues to get stronger and more secure every day worldwide.
Yeah, agree. So there's a few takeaways here that I think if I can organize my thoughts enough. It's a big topic. First one is sort of just like, yes, Bitcoin is a real thing. It's a viable thing. This is worth looking at if you are trying to reassess your long-term investments at your nonprofit. But I would say cautionary tale, don't mess with your restricted funds. Be careful about, how you do it. Be smart, get help, ask the right professionals to help you with this. And then number 2 is one thing I think that we maybe need to just hammer on a little bit more is Bitcoin is also a technology network, and you don't have to buy Bitcoin to use the network and the technology tools around it. So like what we were talking about, the Lightning Network, look at this as an option for micropayments or for international payments. See if this can help your organization do some expansion that you've been meaning to do, but couldn't figure out how to make cost effective, right? I just want to hammer on the don't do shit just because one donor wants you to, but that's not really Bitcoin related. Is there another takeaway here, Paul?
Well, I was just going to add, piggybacking off that part about the micropayments. One of the biggest questions I get is somebody says, well, look, Bitcoin's around $50,000. I can't get one, right? But it's important to remember that Bitcoin subdivides down into 100 million units called Satoshis. So very much like a $1 bill has 100 cents in it, and you can hold a fraction of a dollar, you can own and use a fraction of a Bitcoin. And so, a dollar currently is about 2,000 Satoshis. So you can send, a nickel's worth of Bitcoin to someone on the other side of the planet for no fee through the second layer, the Lightning Network. So that part is very empowering to people around the world who, just have small amounts of money. They want to donate and move. And it just opens up a lot of possibilities.
Well, I think we have successfully melted everyone's minds. Paul, if people want to find out more about Bitcoin and Lightning and all of these things, I know your Twitter feed is fire with all of this stuff all the time. So if people want to connect with you on Twitter, what is your ID there?
My handle on there is The Tone Wrecker. So you will find an ongoing string of just curious things all the time. It's
a treasure trove of curiosities from the king of mayhem. That's right. Bleeps and bloops, synthesizer loops, and Bitcoin for everyone. There you go. Folks, if you enjoyed this episode, do me a huge favor, share it with a friend, rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast app. It really helps us out. If you have a question or a story to share, we'd love to hear from you. Send me a note online or leave a voice memo by calling 612-208-9120. Paul, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jess.
All right, folks, that's our show. Be sure to follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Jess Birkin. We want to hear from you. Send us a message at our website, charitytherapy.show. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at birkinlaw.com/signup. Charity Therapy is a production of Birkin Law Office, PLLC. Our theme song is by Whalehawk. And remember, folks, this podcast is produced for your entertainment and is not a substitute for actual legal advice.